everybody, and welcome back to Beware the Artist. I am Jeremy Jersa, and with me this week I have Kyle Bauer. Kyle, if you want to go ahead and tell everybody who you are and what is it that you do.
Yes, Kyle Bauer. I'm a Baltimore-based artist, originally from Southern Illinois, and did my BFA at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, and then my MFA at Louisiana State University, Baton Rouge, as I always like to say, go Tigers, and do sculpture, mixed media, and as of 2019 would categorize myself as a newly inaugurated printmaker through an opportunity that came to me at Pyramid Atlantic through their Denbo Fellowship. So kind of a jack of all trades. Really enjoy three-dimensional, but 2D is something that my day job has kind of given me an insight to. So followed that path and have since been dabbling in it. So
Great. So in terms of your work, what themes are you overall kind of exploring within your studio practice?
Yeah, so kind of giving a foundation to how my work comes about. I'm really interested in architecture, and that goes back historically in my life, growing up with parents that collected old homes, and we jokingly and affectionately were known as equity builders. So architecture is really important. Domestic architecture, specifically kind of how we live in our spaces, how our spaces live on us, and kind of how cities, that's a micro level, more on a macro level, thinking about kind of how cities and grids and communication kind of happens through that. And then another is kind of tying that into maritime navigation. Spent some time in between undergrad and grad, working on lakes, driving boats, learning to sail, and really found a kinship and interest in the language of maritime signal flag navigation. So using an abbreviated signs and symbols to create and convey messages, and how that can tie into compositional arrangement and then structures of sculptures into prints. And so, yeah.
That's pretty wild. So did you start at a young age kind of woodworking?
Yeah, I mean, growing up in construction sites, you always had in cuts and off cuts. And, I remember there was a major roof project on one of the houses that we worked on. So there's a lot of those soffit drill holes, those 4-inch holes that came out from the soffit vents. So we had all those round circles. So we were building all kinds of stuff. So, and then as it got on, my mom, a lover of old houses, also loved old furniture. So that was nights and weekends kind of helping her out. So yeah, it was a material that was always around, and it's come really in handy, in the last year, being on lockdown and everything, owning a home that has needed some work and some customization. I've been able to take advantage of that.
That's great. So a lot of your work pulls from these experiences that you've had. How much research are you putting in additionally to these kind of past experiences that are going into these projects you're working on?
Yeah, there's definitely an introspective element to the work, in that trying to use, let's say, maybe a life lesson learned or an individual experience, however it might be, and distilling it down so that I have my relationship to it, but then being able to communicate that relationship into kind of a broader term. So in a way, being generally specific, if that kind of makes sense. So there, and some of them have the titles will come from those experiences. Sometimes it's kind of a non-linear narrative that's tied to it. I think part of growing up in and around a culture that I found very, very intriguing, because it was different from the way my parents were, was I spent a lot of time outdoors, hunting and fishing, and I had a lot of mentors. My dad would take me fishing, but he wasn't much of a hunter. And then we had a family friend whose son graduated and went off to the service, and so he didn't have a kid anymore. So I got adopted. And then he would take me out, and he was a naturalist. So he, as a conservation police officer, which was kind of I had to learn the rules by the book, no goofing around with Mike, but it it's kind of given a way to, and looking back at some of those experiences, sitting around a kitchen table and listening to stories and loving how, the narrative would go one way, and, and you learn that. So kind of pulling in that tradition of storytelling and how that will inform a decision or kind of clue in a memory and an experience, and kind of bring it up.
So when you're in the studio, um, how are you actually working? Do you have kind of multiple pieces going, or are you working kind of one project at a time? And then in addition to that, what's the atmosphere like? Do you have music playing? Do you have podcasts? Is there Netflix in the background? What's that situation like for you?
Yeah, so music is important when I work. I probably would have to say it's a combination of staying informed and with NPR and stuff. So I do have some talk radio, and then enjoy listening to sports. If it's a warm Baltimore night and the Orioles are playing, when they're playing and they're playing well, I do miss Joe Angel and Fred Manfra on listening to the baseball games. Love listening to baseball and sports, football as well. Enjoyed Saturdays and Sundays. So. But yeah, it's a diversity. It kind of has a lot. It's a day by day kind of basis. Some days I want to listen to music, and it could be, kind of rough and tumble Johnny Cash. Kind of the rebel, to listening to some deep house, and
Yeah.
kind of mellowing back and just playing. Sometimes it's headphones. Sometimes it's blaring the speakers. So kind of, it's a day by day, case by case. I would say if you came in there and I wasn't listening to something or didn't have anything on the background, you might need to check my temperature. Something's not right. But in terms of projects, I like to have a lot going on, and that goes back to just kind of how I prescribe to craftsmanship and use craftsmanship in my work, and that it takes time. So I'll tend to have a few things going at a time, so that, as this piece dries or glues up, I can move on to the next one. Very much assembly line, but not Henry Ford assembly line. It's it's getting a few things done, and it maximizes that time, because as a full-time employee, that now I commute down to DC when I'm going to work, the my studio time is less and less, and it's very valued. So I want to be as efficient as possible, but not be, just not kind of waste it. Like, appreciate it and let it serve me, and I serve it.
Could you speak a little more to your connection with craft and craftsmanship? Because I feel as though that is such an important piece to your work, something that can be taken for granted when we just see work online or through Instagram. But when I'm looking at your work, I specifically remember the last show I saw of your work was actually at Towson University in the gallery, and just walking around and seeing how the wood joins together, and just the smoothness and the professionalism with that. Could you speak a little bit to that importance within your practice?
Yeah, thank you for noticing that. I mean, that's an important foundation and an important identity to my work and to me. So craftsmanship was, I think it just kind of goes back to just being around the renovation of homes, and then later kind of the restoration of furniture. And then my mother was a custom picture framer for years, so you have to have a level of skill and craft. And maybe maybe it's a little bit Midwesterny in that it's like, if you're going to do a job right, you do it right, or don't do it at all. So I always was, if I wanted to do something, if I wanted to take it, it's like, it's that mastery. It's like, it's that next challenge, it's that next step up. So there is that appreciation, and it's like a job well done, accomplishing a task, but also knowing that I stand behind it and I'm invested in it. So I feel that helps the viewer interpret the work. And so obviously you've responded exactly to a lot of the tenements that my studio philosophy is bound on. So I must be doing something right and sticking to it. So but it's, I always felt as a student, but also now as a museum employee, and have had the opportunity to work very intimately with artwork. So have run the gambit from work that it's like, if you breathe on it wrong, it's going to fall down, to work that it could probably ride on a flatbed, delivery truck with no crate and totally survive in Baltimore streets. So, potholes and such. So we're kind of running the gambit, and kind of feeling how, and seeing it, that I always was attracted to that. So it's kind of that fanboy. It was like, oh, well, they did a really good job, I can do a really good job.
Yeah, I think that there's a level of polish at points within the work where it feels as though it could be a manufactured object. And then I find myself kind of thinking, well, what is this object's purpose? So I'm kind of going back to what I can relate it to, and then bringing myself back to the fact that it is an art object, and it has its function in an intellectual sense, but there isn't necessarily that physical function in the real world with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is, maybe that's a little bit left over from being in a ceramics program, where function is still an important part to that material and my ceramics background. But I had two of my colleagues in my class that made functional ware, so there is a nod and appreciation to something that has function and works, because design is really important. I think to not talk about how influential and important design is to my work, and what I look at reference wise. So I really see it as important that it kind of, maybe it's the lure, maybe it's the attractant. It gets you, the viewer, to wonder, like, well, where's the on button? Or
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember a friend who came by for a studio visit, said that I think at the time her son was 4 or 5, and it was when I was a Sondheim finalist, and she's like, I brought my son in there, and he just kept he kept asking this question, well, where's the on button? How does it move? So yeah, it's cool.
I love that. That's such a great moment. And then you spoke to a little bit of it already, but you also have a background in conservation and restoration. How did you get into that, and what is your kind of daily life like doing that job in addition to your studio practice?
Yeah. So came into it very, very much because when we moved to Baltimore, girlfriend at the time, now my wife, I had just like the last 3 to 4 months when we were living in Baton Rouge, had volunteered and then turned in a couple kind of contract work as an art handler, and got my way into it that way. And so when we moved here, I needed a job, so I just went in the security route, got a job as security, and then watched kind of how the museum worked, and found the people that I needed to talk to, and badgered the hell out of them and gave them a resume, and they awarded me with a 4-month contract, and then got into it because the ace up my sleeve is I had my mother's picture framing, her custom picture framing business. So I had learned the commercial side of it, working nights and weekends and helping her out while I was in high school, well, really middle school, high school. And then when I was home here and there, would help her out. And then while I was an undergrad, because I could cut a mat and I knew how to use a mat cutter, I always turned it into how to keep a cold beer in my refrigerator. So it was always being a little bit of entrepreneurial and bartering. And then when I was at the BMA, this opportunity opened up as just a matting, it was a conservation technician of prints, drawings, and photographs, which is a mouthful for being a matter framer. And I had the mentor who, I owe a lot of credit to. Tom Primo's his name, who's now at Philadelphia at the PMA. And he brought me on, and he said, we're gonna take this slow. I'm gonna show you how to do things, but this is bench training, and truly for 5 years straight was bench trained by Tom and then other colleagues in the conservation department, and taken along in such a way that you know there were fast times and there were slow times, but it was allowed to kind of understand what it is to care for work. And it's like you slightly take ownership of it, because you're ushering it into that next generation or the next two generations of by kind of preserving it, taking care of it, and you get to see some pretty cool stuff. So and work on some cool stuff.
What would you say is kind of the coolest thing that you've been able to work on during your time there? Are you legally allowed to say?
Oh yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah, okay.
yeah. Which the thing that we're not allowed to do, and that's very much a known across the board, is we just cannot photograph inside storage facilities.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes sense. I mean, banks don't let you photograph inside of their vaults or any of that stuff.
Right.
If you do, you're doing it kind of clandestinely. So there's some common sense things you can't do. But no, one of the fun pieces that right when I got started, probably within the first 2 years, was a Sarah Z piece that the BMA acquired, and it was a monster. I think when it went up the wall, it was 18 feet. And then when it came out from the wall with all of its dressing and all of the salt piles and different parts and sculpture and cut paper, because it was a sculpture, but it was a bunch of cut paper, and it was laser cut paper. So, and it was down to like the tiniest little nub, and you'd move and it would like, oh, please don't break, please don't break, please don't break. So I that was a cool piece, and it was a intimidating piece, because shortly thereafter she was announced to be the representative at the Venice Biennale.
Mm-hmm.
And having went there in 2009 and kind of gotten the experience of being at the Biennale as a grad student, and kind of like, whoa, being able to, oh well, I see the work, I know the work, I know the artist, and it's kind of comes full circle in that. So that's one experience that really sticks out as my time at the BMA. Now at the NGA, because of lockdown, I really haven't had a lot of opportunities on site, just because of the ever-changing schedule and shifting schedule. But I'm excited. 2021, if we do get some stuff going for the fall, there's going to be some projects. There's a project I've been assigned to called Double, that looks at how artists use doubles and or multiples in mostly two-dimensional work, but it's an all-encompassing show. So that's really all I have on that for now, just because it's kind of in its curatorial infancy, but probably 2022. So yeah.
And you started that job just as COVID hit, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, I started on February 2nd. Yeah, it was February 2nd. I started, and clamorings in the background, listening to the news, riding down to the train on DC, and catching up on my film, like hearing about what was going on in China, hearing about what was going on in Italy, and then learning a little bit more. And everyone in DC, there was this palatable kind of tension, and I guess maybe DC always has that. It is DC. We've all been there, no knock. I do love my DC people. They're good people. But no, just to it was on site for 6 weeks, maybe 6.5 weeks, and then they shut us down. And so yeah, I've learned a lot about the NGA and learned a lot about federal government employment through Zoom calls. So sitting right here, kind of in my sterile little office.
Such a weird time to live in. Going back to your studio practice though, so how do you actually go about starting a piece? Because there are a lot of kind of factors that go into your work. Are you starting with a sketch, or do you move kind of organically in terms of reacting to what's happening within your pieces?
They start with sketches, doodles,
Mhm.
sketches, the margins of my notebooks, meaning notebooks, date calendar books, anything kind of very intuitively, stream of conscious. It's very shape driven. It isn't really something specifically referenced. I'm not drawing a like a tool or a physical object.
Mhm.
It is kind of a very crude construction of a composition, and as the 2D is assembled into 3D parts and pieces, those are then in some cases constructed in like maquettes. Other times it's just straight from very crude drawing to I know what I see it. That's going to be a corbel. That's going to have formica. That's going to be covered in reflective stickers. That's going to be cast ceramic. Like it almost, some of them, it's very, very specific in my head.
Mhm.
And then others, it's, I allow intuition to work, allow kind of, how some of them are a little freer, a little more fun. Others are very strict and very, very, serious. And I think it's probably the way you read them is probably the opposite.
Mm.
You read, oh, that one's really fun, but that one was the really strict one for me. While this one was like, that one's very strict. And it's like, oh, that one was the easy. So, you know.
That's so funny. That's so funny. So much of the work does have this kind of back and forth between color and raw wood. Um, do you want to speak to that kind of decision making? Because that's always intrigued me, very much so in your work, and also just having such a limited palette. How are you making those choices?
Yeah. So when I first started this kind of this body of work and over its maturation the last, let's say 10, 11 years since leaving grad school. When I first started it, it was about concealment. It was about kind of putting on this facade, this false front,
Hmm.
taking these materials that were plywoods and 2x4s and salvaged sheet goods and stuff like that, working them and finishing them up to a level, and then covering and completely concealing it, and not seeing um, not seeing the material to me in some ways didn't really fall in line with some of the language I was talking about being honesty and presenting the history of maybe this craftsmanship object,
Mm.
because I wasn't glazing. If
Yeah.
it's ceramics, I wasn't glazing it. I was shooting it with some car primer and then coming back with a combination of um, oil-based and latex-based paints
Mm.
to kind of create my surface. So there were some things that just as I started to look at what I was saying, interpret, kind of dive in and be critical and look on back my to what was it making sense kind of a thing. I
Mm.
guess is the
Yeah.
better way
Yeah.
to say it. So, and then it really started to pull back and want to go, um, want to show the material and then also show the craftsmanship that I was preaching about. I was saying craftsmanship, 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 and then I was like, well, yeah, you can hide crappy craftsmanship with some putty and some sandpaper and some paint. Like
Hmm.
I could be saying one thing and pulling the wool over your eyes, and so it didn't really jive. And I think in a couple of interviews, I got caught and I tripped over my words and I was like, oh, so in 2016 I got the Hamiltonian Fellowship. So when I was at the Hamiltonian Fellowship, it was really an opportunity to kind of take the previous 5, 6 years of being here in Baltimore and the DC, the MVA region. Uh, um, so it it was kind of it naturally happened, but some of it I think was more deliberately forced. And during my time at Hamiltonian, I really wanted to start stripping back and pulling back the layers and being very, very conscious of the material that I was using. So I really
Hmm.
simplified it down to plywood and construction grade lumber. It wasn't anything very special. It was a lot of clear pine. It was
Hmm.
1/2 inch ACX, those grades of plywood, 3/4 inch. So
And the color palette itself, where are you pulling colors from, or is that more of just a personal kind of aesthetic choice?
No, that actually is pulling directly from navigation. So
Okay.
using those colors, using those color schemes and patterns, those are all uh, either if it's directly pulling from it, so kind of color combinations,
Hmm.
um, but also some of it is artistic license. Yeah, and be like, okay, you've set up this navigational flag to mean this, or this sign painted in this color to mean this. Yes, that's that rules of the road. Well, this is my road and this is kind of my highway kind of thing. And I'm gonna take it and do something else to it, kind of make a make my own alphabet or make my own language with my work and everything.
Much of the work that kind of when I first came across your work, I was really intrigued by this play between almost a two-dimensional space and entering the three-dimensional space. Specifically, thinking about the sculptures where they are all monochromatic, and then playing with the wall plane and then the floor plane, and then there's a sculpture. Um, do you see this kind of reference to the kind of quote unquote traditional two-dimensional picture plane as kind of a maybe a subversive commentary, or is it just more of an exploration of how sculpture can function?
Um, I you know I think there is some subversion in there. I mean,
Hmm.
love to love to be a little bit of a trouble causer. I can't not admit that it's fun to kind of play poke fun. Being a sculptor, you're poking fun at the painters. The painters are
Hmm.
poking fun at the sculptures.
Yeah.
But no, honestly, it's uh, it's something that I give credit a lot to my day job,
Mm.
and always being around and seeing really really good prints, and how if someone has really understood perspective, someone has really understood how to use that material or that process. And you know all kidding aside, you're looking at this thing and you're like, there's depth there. There
Mm.
is there the way in which they put together this print or they put together this painting. If you just put blinders on me and you put it in a box and I was looking right at it, I might as well be in this immersive environment. I'm going to
Right.
continue to find things. I'm going to continue to search. And then to kind of pull that back to more of a personal experience, the way in which kind of architecture blends into itself, and how through repetition and pattern you kind of lose an object, and then that goes into camouflage. And so a little bit of that history of hunting and spending time outdoors, and kind of that that pursuit. So holistically, it's kind of everything manifesting itself, and kind of being born into these explorations of 2D into 3D, 3D into 2D, and and kind of how those both merge, because the sketchbook is really important. And
Hmm.
it's not something I really share in terms of, I know some artists are very public about their sketchbook. Mine's a lot of stick figures and a lot of descriptions, a lot of detail. Like I'm writing plans, like it's all these plans out. This is going to go here. This is going to go here. So um, it's not particularly something I would share, but it's really important because that 2D and that structure provides a plan that then that plan follows into execution.
Mm.
And um, being around prints and being around that um, really well crafted object, work on paper and in using a process, it I just kind of struck this question is, well, 2D into 3D, 3D into 2D, and where does the foreground, middle ground, background, where can we kind of you move in such an angle? So it's very much kind of in a nod to optical illusion,
Mm.
and using that that moment in which is, if we're walking around a city, for example, and you walk by an alley, and it's the perspective, the light, how the trash cans and the dumpsters and everything's really worked, so that there's a point at which kind of everything lines up, and what's in front, what's in middle, and what's in back, they all kind of just merge together. So there is this, you know, uh, magic eye and wanting to kind of want to make the magic eye with sculpture. You know, just kind of, I'm kind of somewhat thinking about back to objects I remember from childhood and in my history and stuff like that. So that's kind of, you know, yeah, that's where I would look at them being that way, or exploring the 2D to 3D to 2D kind of back.
Who would you say are some artists that you look to for inspiration, or just over the course of your career that have been kind of influential artists that you've looked at and said, oh, I want to take this from them, take that from them. Who are these influences for you?
Yeah, I have to say probably the one that really sticks out is Martin Puryear. Um, Absolutely, just loved his steadfast commitment to craftsmanship, his steadfast commitment to material choices.
Mm.
And when, you know, the ups and downs, the popular, you know, popular material, popular technique to not popular, you look at his catalog and you look at his work, it really, it never wavered too far off. Now, compositions and material decisions and explorations were always there. I mean, his use of various techniques. I mean, traditional crafting techniques to kind of modern fabrication techniques. So, and then more recently, he's explored the surfaces and putting some pretty like tactile material on his sculpture that it changes it from being this kind of aggressive, very stark piece, and it stands in attention to being very soft. But you know, it's 1,000 pounds of wood. So that's one person. God, I always feel bad because there's so many artists I look at, and you know, Ron Nagel's another one. I don't know if you're familiar with Ron Nagel, California ceramic artist and musician. He's always had a musician gig, and he's been releasing albums now in the last couple of years, or reissuing his albums. So I like his attention to detail and his use of ceramics. He's a graduate of kind of the California finish fetish group. So he's a next of kin, I would call him. You know, Ken Price disciple, best buds with Ken Price, if you're familiar with it. So John McCracken, those kind of folks. But that kind of hot rod culture.
Yeah.
You know, that slick craftsmanship. You know, can you put 8 coats of clear coat on a candy coat and make it seem like it's 10 feet deep? Yeah. You know, you see that attention and the curve of a rear quarter panel in the sunshine. You know, it harkens to things that are edible and inedible, and
it's so seductive.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
So at what I always like to ask people this, because I find it such an interesting kind of distinction for ourselves as artists. But at what point in your career did you actually start calling yourself an artist?
Yeah. I mean, maybe when I got the piece of paper, I don't know. I mean, in one way, I probably felt more like an artist than calling myself an artist when, you know, I had the full-on independent studio, which, you know, we're studio neighbors. So having that room to myself next in Crown, and then also some you know, career acknowledgments, some accolades, you know, being a Sondheim finalist, which was huge, and kind of just blown away to shortly thereafter having my first solo show in DC at Flashpoint Gallery, writing a proposal, getting that proposal kicked back to me saying, we like the work, button it up, you're going to round 2. And so being able to kind of go back to that, and then and a budget, and working with the curator, curatorial advisory panel to putting the show together. So that was a really cool experience. And then like Hamiltonian, getting the getting the fellowship and then graduating from the fellowship, and knowing that like it was 3 or 4 years that I applied in a row,
Hmm.
and it didn't, it didn't sink that time or the time before, but for some reason, Mercury wasn't retrograde, or I read my horoscope all in a row and it all worked. I don't know how it worked, but someone liked it and then they saw it. So kind of doing those, there's like getting the studio was important, being independent, and but also acknowledgement from institutions and organizations, because things like Sondheim, those are artists and those are curators,
Hmm.
and those are professionals in the field that, it's a subjective nature of the business that we work in, but to have individuals that are 10 years your senior, 15, 20 years, and they're looking at you as an emerging artist and they're saying, oh, we like what it's interesting what you're doing. And just even that, win or no win is like, okay, it's that reaffirming to say, keep going, keep going,
Yeah.
keep going. So it provides, it's kind of the, it's that bowl of cereal that you just kind of, it gets replenished every now and again and you're able to keep eating.
Yeah, that outside validation that can really light a fire under you in the best way possible. And I would imagine, being around the works that you're around every day, that also lights such a fire underneath of you, because you're seeing this quality work nonstop, and you're like, oh, I gotta keep on, pushing out, keep on executing these different works. Having such a experience within that kind of conservation world, and having seen so much, um, what would you say is one piece of art that you actually have to see in person before you die? What's that one piece of art you need to make a pilgrimage to?
Mm, that's a good one. That's a good one. Huh. Um, oh man, you put me on the spot. That's tough. I don't, I don't. It was one of the things that really kind of stuck out to an experience for me is, I don't know if it was one particular piece, but I think the experience of going to the Biennale,
Mm,
and not to cop out and say like I can't think of anything, like
no, yeah,
I
yeah,
feel like if I pick something, I'd be doing a disservice to
I
other things.
totally get that.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna I'm gonna wrap it into the Biennale, and um, for me, it was there. I was able to experience it on 2 different weekends. I was over on a study abroad
Hmm.
art history program in graduate school, and so we were there for 5, 6 weeks, and it was going on at the time, and to go 2 different weekends with 2 different groups of people, so it was a cool experience, and being able to see everything from Thomas Saraceno's work very early on in 2009, and like being in this room with this bungee corded kind of amoeba that's tied to all the walls, and you're having to navigate through it and it bounce around, and and coming from somewhere, it's like, oh, I'm touching the art, to seeing Bruce Naumann's presentation at the American Pavilion, and so it's that experience, which I look back on fondly, and it's very nostalgic, and
Hmm.
it's kind of if it's my pilgrimage, it's my Mecca. It's however, it's the Wailing Wall, or Mount on the Rock. I mean, we could pull out any number of religious kind of analogies there, but it was truly a point in my young career, being still in school, that was, I look back on, and I'm kind of forever appreciative and fond of it. So that's my answer. I'm sticking to it.
I like that. I like that. So this might be another bit of a put you on the spot moment, but do you have any kind of dream projects that you would like to eventually kind of accomplish?
Yeah. One of the projects is It got started back in almost 2 years ago now. So the spring of 2019, I was able to do the Denbo Fellowship at Pyramid Atlantic and take and start building an alphabet based on the maritime signal flag alphabet of my own out of sculptural parts and pieces for a larger completed portfolio. So as an artist and as someone who makes 3D, the conundrum we have is everyone wants to put things on the wall, but you're always going to lose that battle to the couch, the lamp, the ottoman. You're going to lose that battle as a three-dimensional person. It's just like, if your work's going to take up a place, it better damn be important in a home. So I always admired artists that put out editions. So one of my dream projects it's gotten started. It's a little slow, but I'm hoping that one day my goal is to offer an entire, portfolio in a case with a colophon, giving a full front explanation of all the little prints, what their letters mean, kind of the whole thing. You get 26 prints or whatever language, I'm thinking of the English language has 26 letters, but whatever artistic license I kind of come into, but being able to develop a sellable portfolio package that a collector or a patron could purchase, could hang it up, and then also have that ability to kind of rotate them out. Because working in paper, the first thing you notice is you can only keep it up for so long, because UV's public enemy number one when it comes to works on paper. So to kind of be able to always kind of change, have pieces in your arsenal to display, or mood to that room. You could put one in that room to that mood, kind of play to it. So that's one thing that I would really like to see come to fruition and be completed. It's nice to have it. It's going to be a marathon. I promise you that.
I love this idea though of the portfolio. We see them happening all the time. Prints and editions in that portfolio sold as one piece, but I've never really considered switching out the piece on the wall, how that can change just your everyday life, your everyday experience of another room. It seems so simple, but it's brilliant, just that kind of exchange. So I'm just kind of having an epiphany moment right now. But yeah, I love that. I love that project. Do you see an end to it? Do you see kind of an obtainable goal as to when it might be completed?
Um, with everything that has come up with the pandemic and everything, I wouldn't want to put a set date, because I really, like, if I put a set date on myself, I will absolutely just like buckle under all these weird levels of it's not healthy. So to admit to you that I don't have a solid deadline date, but looking forward to when things get back to working, when art institutions are able to be open in person, opportunities to take 3 months and go do another residency, maybe out of state, for a couple of weeks, and kind of complete 4 or 5 more there. So use it as an opportunity to maybe it's not created all in once. Maybe it's created over the next 5 years, let's say. And in these next 5 years, I'm able to do 5 different residencies, short-term residencies, very focused residencies to select a section of the alphabet or a section of that portfolio and work with that. So not to put a date on it, but we'll say 5 years.
Yeah, that sounds good. So, over your career, I'm sure you've encountered some amazing people, and they've all probably at some point given you some bit of advice. What is one piece of advice that really stands out to you in terms of your trajectory of a career? And what is one piece of advice you would like to pass on to a rising generation of creatives?
Yeah. Probably the one bit of advice that I've always kept close, is really one that it's more of a, maybe it's a little bit more of an adage of, um, if you're going to do the job right. And in many different forms, it kind of manifests itself.
Hmm.
It doesn't always come out so clean and simple as that. So if you're going to do it, whatever you're going to do, I mean, put in 110%, and understand that failure is part of success. Don't I mean, how many rejection letters you got in your rejection letter email folder? I mean, uh,
I can't even count.
I know. I wish I could say, like, when you talk in these settings where it's like all you're talking about is what you've done and success, but maybe that other thing, that bit of advice I would pass along to the next generation is work with your failure,
Mm,
and admit that you can fail.
yeah,
And not everything is going to be perfect. I mean, there's a sketch that gets turned into a sculpture that then all of a sudden gets cannibalized for two other sculptures.
mm,
And looking back on it, yeah, that one sculpture is a failure. I mean, I guess maybe it's that A, B, C, D, E, F, that the grading scale we're all raised with. That F is the worst. And I mean, even when I was growing up, the middle schools changed. They put them as E's, not F's, because they tried to change the psyche and it didn't work. It made you hate E just as much as you hated F.
right.
So, but yeah, to yeah, my one bit of advice, my one bit of uh, kind of suggestion, or you know token, and be like, embrace failure. And don't do it intentionally, and don't be a you know you know don't be a jerk about it.
Hmm.
But embrace failure, and yeah, I mean, learn from it. Your writing is only going to get better
Right.
if you are able to, you know like, take what other people are going to give to you. Your studio practice is only going to get better if you embrace that whole idea of failure, and not think of it as a bad word, but think of it as a word that is going to get you to that next level. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, and I feel as though that sentiment is something that can't be reiterated enough, especially in today's culture where everything in terms of living online basically is a curated experience. So you're not seeing the failures of everyone's everyday studio practice. Let's take it to art in social media. People, they post that the great works. They're not really posting the hundreds of pieces that came before that failed tragically. Um, and I think younger generations aren't necessarily aware of that as much as we are, because
Mhm.
we've been in the studio. We know that there's 10 pieces that fail for that one piece that actually exists that functions. So I love that idea of embracing failure and using it to learn, because that's how we learn, and not
Mhm.
putting too much pressure on yourself.
Yeah, yeah. It is, I think, a bedrock to evolution.
Mm,
Because you know my one of those, kind of taking a step back and looking, now 10 years post school, of of like seeing this process is, you'll see people around you, they'll get success, they'll get acknowledgments. Trust me, I've been envious and I've been jealous. I'll be the first to admit it.
mhm.
But using that as like a way to light the fire under your ass, but also hold yourself accountable. you
Yeah,
know I mean, you could be envious as hell of someone, but walk into that show that they're having, or walk into that experience that they're putting on, and give them the 10 or 20 or 30 minutes that's required, and go into it. Yeah, you're going to go into it with your bias. You're going to go into it with your prejudice, your thinkings of whatever that person might have done. But if you don't give the work a chance, you're not doing yourself a favor, because through some of the work that is probably the hardest to digest and the hardest to relate to, it'll show you something about your work. It might show you how you need to communicate your work. And I say that because you might be you have the blinders on. You're pulling that buggy and you've got the blinders on, and all this stuff is happening in your periphery. But if you're too myopic, so thinking about it, but also in taking on that responsibility and embracing it, and taking ownership of it. So we're not perfect, and like you said, if you look at social media, if you follow the news, if you follow contemporary culture, it is very curated. And I probably, being 36 now, looking back on it, being, what is it? I'm a millennial, an older one, but I'm still a millennial. And how I remember there wasn't internet when I first went into school. It was late middle school, but there were still times where you had a computer, but it was those floppy disks. You put them in, you slammed it down, and you hoped the computer worked. So, but that's rural Illinois. So we were years behind. But thinking of both sides of that. But now that there's individuals that have to be, they're glued to their phone, or they're glued to this perfectly curated expectation, and it goes back to that idea of failing. Like, you can't fail. You can't show that you made a painting that you thought was good, and you put all your efforts into it, and then you go and put it out there, and it just gets cut down at the knees. We've all been through critique. If you've been through a critique in undergrad or grad school, you can put your heart into something, go put it out there, and you'll trip over your words, and people will absolutely focus on that, and you will walk out of that room wondering where your brain went.
Right.
And your brain and your pride are two different things, and you're trying to put them back together, because in 24 hours you've got to go and do it again, or you've got to go teach a class, or it's like looking back on that stuff, and how it could, for some folks, it's probably flashback inducing. So.
Yes, and sometimes the best way, though, like, because we overcame it, and we're still working through it. So once again, learning from those failures. With that all being said, I think that is kind of the perfect place to kind of to end this conversation. So if people are looking for your work, where might they be able to find it?
Yeah, my website, www.kylejbauer.com. That's probably where the most up to date. I also have an Instagram handle @KyleJBauer, and so those are really where the work is existing now. I'm not, since the pandemic, I haven't been that good of a poster of Instagram. But new year, new promise. Let's keep that New Year's resolution going. If I can still put one in. But upcoming for shows, there's an opportunity that's being built at kind of created, and it all depends on what happens with the pandemic, at the Creative Alliance in the fall. More information to come onto that. But if they're able to go forth with it, I'm looking forward to that as a curated show of mostly artists in the region that are sculptors. So Thomas James is the curator from the Creative Alliance, and shout out to Thomas and his willingness to include and show the work, having never really done a studio visit. So, but maybe one day we'll get there.
Amazing. Kyle, thank you so much for being a part of this project, for being on the show. I really enjoyed this conversation. It's been great. Everyone, make sure that you take time to go and see Kyle's work, and tune in next week for our next episode. All right. So Kyle, I will see you later.
All right. See you later. Thanks, Jeremy.
All right. Bye.